I've got some of the best World War II air combat movies, and I'm ranking them right now. You'll see John Wayne playing a Medal of Honor pilot, dogfights filmed with actual Spitfires, and a real Luftwaffe ace flying a real Messerschmitt. John Wayne leads a Marine squadron of Wildcat fighters during the Battle of Guadalcanal. He's the tough commanding officer who knows discipline saves lives. The real tension is between Wayne and Robert Ryan, who plays his executive officer. They disagree on how to run the squadron. Wayne's all iron fist. Ryan wants to stay close to his pilots. The two of them are good enough actors to make that conflict feel real even when the script isn't helping them. Wayne's character is based on Captain John Smith, a Marine ace who shot down 19 Japanese planes over Guadalcanal and won the Medal of Honor. Wayne even kind of looks like him. Most of the combat is stock footage spliced in with new material. Howard Hughes, who bankrolled the whole production, wanted it shot in Technicolor so it wouldn't look like the black and white war films everyone else was making. The flying stuff works better than you'd expect because of that. It's the ground scenes where it gets stiff. The behind-the-scenes situation is almost more interesting than the movie. Nicholas Ray directed this, and he hated it. Ray was a liberal who thought the whole thing was jingoistic nonsense, but it was 1951 and the Hollywood blacklist was happening. If you leaned left, you proved your loyalty by making exactly this kind of movie. So the director of Rebel Without a Cause spent his days filming John Wayne yelling at pilots to get back in formation. George Lucas spent 23 years trying to make this film. He started developing it in 1988, right around the time he was wrapping up Indiana Jones. He originally wanted it to be a sprawling trilogy, something on the scale of Lawrence of Arabia. Instead, it took over 2 decades and he had to pay for the whole thing himself. Lucas went to every major studio in Hollywood, showed them the project, explained the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black military aviators in U.S. history. Every single one said no. The studios told him 60% of their profit came from overseas, and they didn't think international audiences would show up for an all-black cast. So the guy who created Star Wars wrote a check for $58 million and made the movie himself. The aerial combat in Red Tails is genuinely great. Some of the best dogfight sequences you'll see in any World War II film. The problem is everything between the dogfights. Flat characters, stock conflicts, and the dialogue doesn't quite land. They even brought in a real historian, Dr. Daniel Hallman, as a technical advisor. He liked the spirit of it, but pointed out the movie plays loose with the facts. Like, for example, there's a scene where the pilots destroy a German destroyer by strafing it. It never happened. The film also claims the Tuskegee Airmen were the only fighter escort group on a major Berlin mission. There were actually 5 groups on that run. William Wyler won the Oscar for directing Ben-Hur. He also flew combat missions over Nazi Germany in a B-17 bomber with cameras strapped to the fuselage. One of his cameramen was killed when the plane he was in got shot down over France. Wyler took that footage and turned it into a documentary about the Memphis Belle, the first American bomber to survive 25 missions over Europe. Roosevelt saw it and ordered it shown across the country. The 1990 movie is a fictionalized version of that final mission. They managed to get 5 real B-17 for the shoot, which was insane considering there were only 8 left flying in the entire world, and for about 20 minutes, the movie really works. The crew settling in, doing their jobs, the banter between guys who've been flying together for so long. Then a fighter picks off another bomber in their formation, and you feel it in your stomach. That stretch genuinely had me thinking this was going to be something special. It doesn't hold, though. The writers took everything that went wrong across the real Memphis Belle's 25 missions and packed it all into one flight. Engines go out, people get hit, someone nearly falls out of the aircraft, the landing gear won't come down. One disaster after another until you stop worrying about the characters and start noticing the screenwriter. It's just a bit too much. You can practically hear the pages turning. Malta is a tiny island between Sicily and North Africa, and during the war it was one of the most important pieces of land on Earth. Whoever controlled it controlled the Mediterranean supply routes. The British held it. The Axis wanted it destroyed. They hit the island with more than 3,000 air raids trying to bomb it into submission. Alec Guinness plays a reconnaissance pilot who gets stranded on Malta and ends up flying photo missions over enemy convoys. Jack Hawkins plays the base commander running out of everything: food, planes, ammunition, time. The situation on the island plays out like a compressed version of what Britain went through early in the war. A handful of pilots holding the line against non-stop attacks and waiting for supply ships that might not make it through. They shot the whole thing on Malta, and this was only 1952, so the war damage is still everywhere. The bombed-out buildings behind the actors aren't props. They also had access to real Spitfires still in active service. When they mix the new footage with actual wartime combat film, it blends together better than you'd expect from a movie this old. The Death Star trench run in Star Wars didn't come out of nowhere. George Lucas has been pretty open about where he got it. The finale of this movie has a squadron of mosquito bombers screaming through a narrow fjord in Norway while anti-aircraft guns light them up from both sides. Lucas actually spliced this footage into the working print of Star Wars as a placeholder. His effects team had to figure out how to build those shots from scratch. The setup is that Cliff Robertson leads a Royal Air Force squadron of de Havilland Mosquitoes, and they've been handed what is basically a suicide mission. There's a German rocket fuel factory hidden under a cliff at the end of a fjord. If it stays running, Germany fuels its V-2 program and puts D-Day at risk. The only way to take it out is to bomb the cliff face until it collapses and buries the whole thing, which means flying low and straight through a narrow corridor bristling with guns. The director here was a bomber pilot in the war, so the flying sequences have a weight to them that you don't always get. They used 8 actual Mosquitoes for the production. The training scenes set in the Scottish Highlands are probably the best thing in the movie. Real planes carving through mountain glens, standing in for the Norwegian terrain, all shot in color Panavision, which was a first for an aviation film. This is the other movie George Lucas rated for Star Wars. The briefing scene, the ground crew waiting for news, the attack formation, Lucas lifted the structure almost beat for beat. He liked the film so much he hired its special effects cinematographer, Gilbert Taylor, to shoot Star Wars. The story is about Barnes Wallace, an engineer who came up with one of the craziest ideas of the war: a bomb that bounces across water. You drop it from a low-flying bomber, it skips over the surface like a stone, hits a German dam, and sinks down the wall. Then it detonates. It sounds a bit like science fiction, and when the movie came out in America, audiences thought it was. Richard Todd, who plays Squadron leader Guy Gibson, said years later that the film flopped in the US specifically because nobody realized it was a true story. They figured bouncing bombs were made up. The first half is all Wallace, played by Michael Redgrave, trying to prove his idea works. It plays more like an inventor's drama than a war movie. When they finally hand the thing over to the military and Gibson starts training his crews, the film shifts gears. The pilots have to fly at just 150 feet. The bombing run on the dams is the payoff, and it works, even if the effects look dated now. Roland Emmerich is the guy who made Independence Day and The Day After Tomorrow. He's built a career on blowing things up at a massive scale, and whatever you think about his movies, the last third of Midway is the greatest CGI naval battle ever put on film. The movie covers the build-up to the Battle of Midway, which was the turning point of the Pacific War. The first 2/3 set up the situation, and it's a bit of a slog. The characters are so stereotypical and the dialogue so clunky that the drama between battles actually weighs the movie down. But then the battle starts, and this is where Emmerich earns his seat. The U.S. torpedo squadron spot the Japanese fleet and make their first run. They get massacred. Then the dive bomber squadrons arrive and everything changes. The bombing runs on the Japanese carriers are breathtaking. Emmerich manages to make these sequences work as action, as historical recreation, and as emotional drama all at once. It's the best thing he's ever directed. They assembled 100 aircraft for this movie, 100 real planes, Spitfires, Hurricanes, Messerschmitts, Heinkels. Somebody called it the 35th largest air force in the world, and they weren't joking. And then they hired Adolf Galland, a former Luftwaffe ace, as a technical advisor. Galland had actually fought in the Battle of Britain, on the other side of it. The movie covers the summer and fall of 1940 when Germany's Air Force tried to destroy the Royal Air Force so they could invade Britain. You get both sides. The commanders making strategic calls, the pilots living and dying with those decisions. The dogfights are all real planes and real air, and that's what separates this from almost every other aerial combat film. They didn't use special effects or models for the main sequences. Those are all real Spitfires and Messerschmitts actually flying at each other. Cameras mounted on a B-25 bomber captured it from every angle. Gregory Peck was offered the role and turned it down at first. He thought the script was too similar to Command Decision. They talked him into it, and it became one of the best performances he ever gave. The real bomber group the film is based on was averaging 10% losses per mission in its early days. Out of 287 men who flew to England in October 1942, 87 survived the war. Peck plays a general who takes over an American bomber unit in England that's falling apart. Morale is gone, losses are stacking up. The previous commander cared too much about his men and it broke him. He couldn't send them on missions anymore knowing the odds. Peck's character comes in cold, demotes people, reassigns anyone who asks for a transfer to the worst unit he can find, strips the whole operation down and rebuilds it from nothing. The Air Force loaned them a dozen B-17 with military crews and hundreds of airmen as extras. What I really love about this movie is the rhythm of a bombing run. The briefing, the takeoff, the wait, the landing, the debrief. You feel the routine of it. There's no standout bombing sequence, the combat footage is all archival, and honestly the movie doesn't even need one. The whole point is that the real war happens on the ground, in the space between missions.